She threw the money at his feet like he was nothing. 50 crisp $100 bills scattered across the cobblestone in front of 200 of America's wealthiest people, and every single eye in that courtyard turned to watch what the quiet maintenance man would do next. Vivian Ashford, one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, smiled like she'd already won. She hadn't. Because Marcus Bennett didn't bend down, didn't flinch, didn't say a word. And what happened in the next 4 minutes, with a dead car, a laughing crowd, and one little girl's whisper, would bring her entire billion-dollar empire to its knees. If you're watching this from your city tonight, drop it in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. Subscribe if you're staying for the whole ride. This one's going to shake you. The morning started like every other morning on the Ashford estate. Marcus Bennett woke at 5:15 a.m., not because an alarm told him to, but because his body had been trained by grief to never sleep too long. 7 years of doing it alone had turned him into a man who existed in the quiet hours, the hours before the rest of the world demanded anything from anyone. He made 2 cups of oatmeal, one with brown sugar and a little too much honey the way Sophie liked it, one plain the way he'd eaten every breakfast since the hospital. Sophie was 9 years old, and she sat across from him at their small kitchen table in the groundskeeper's cottage at the far edge of the estate, her dark hair still wild from sleep, her eyes already too awake for 5 a.m. "You're thinking about Mom again," she said. Not a question. "Eat your oatmeal." "You get this look?" she said, stirring her spoon in slow circles, "like you're listening to something I can't hear." Marcus set his mug down. He looked at his daughter, this strange, precise, impossibly perceptive child, who had somehow come out of the worst years of his life and still managed to make him feel like maybe he hadn't ruined everything. "Your oatmeal's getting cold," he said. She ate, but she watched him the whole time. The Ashford estate sat on 42 acres of manicured land outside of Greenwich, Connecticut. To the people who worked there, the groundskeepers, the drivers, the kitchen staff, it was just a job. To the people who visited, the hedge fund managers, the tech executives, the senators, it was a symbol. It said, "This is what winning looks like." Marcus had been the senior maintenance supervisor for 3 years. Before that, 2 years on the grounds crew. Before that, something he never talked about, something filed away in a life that no longer belonged to him. He was good at his job because he understood systems, how things connected, how one small failure could cascade into something catastrophic if you didn't catch it early enough. He walked the estate every morning with the same methodical attention he'd once applied to things that actually mattered, looking for problems before they became disasters. He was not the kind of man people noticed. That was in fact the point. The charity gala had been on the calendar for 6 weeks. Every year, Vivian Ashford hosted it on the estate. 300 guests catered food, a silent auction that raised more money in one night than most American families would ever see in a lifetime. Marcus had spent the week before the event repairing irrigation systems, testing outdoor lighting circuits, and making sure the vintage car collection housed in the East Garage was presentable. Vivian had specifically requested that her father's 1961 Jaguar E-Type be moved to the front entrance as a display piece. It was the centerpiece of the evening, a symbol of the family legacy she had spent her entire adult life trying to protect. Yet he'd checked the car on Wednesday. It had started fine. He didn't check it again on Saturday. That was the mistake. Not his. There were 3 other maintenance staff assigned to the garage. But it was the mistake that would change everything. Marcus wasn't supposed to be near the front entrance when it happened. Guts. He was on the east side of the property with Sophie, who spent Saturdays following him on his rounds because his usual sitter, Mrs. Caldwell from the village, had a church commitment. Sophie was small enough that she could tuck herself beside him without anyone noticing. She carried a little notebook and wrote down things she found interesting. A bird call she hadn't heard before. The way water pressure changed when 2 systems ran simultaneously. The exact sound a corroded wire made before it failed. She was 9, and she noticed things that grown men with engineering degrees walked right past. "Daddy!" she said, tugging his sleeve. Something smells wrong near the front. Smells wrong how? Like electric wrong, not fire wrong, like something's arguing with itself. He almost told her to stop being dramatic. Almost. Instead, he changed direction. He heard it before he saw it. The crowd had gathered around the Jaguar at the main entrance, 200 people in formal wear, holding champagne flutes, watching with politely concealed amusement, as two men in pressed suits crouched around the open hood of the most beautiful car Marcus had ever seen. Chemhui. He recognized one of them immediately. Derek Holloway. He'd been flown in from London, the most sought-after vintage automotive specialist in the world. The man had been quoted in Car and Driver, had restored vehicles for European royal families, had a waiting list 3 years long. The man next to him, Marcus, didn't know his name, but his hand said machinist, and his posture said he was pretending he wasn't panicking. The Jaguar wouldn't start, and in the center of it all, still and perfect as a statue in a red gown that probably cost more than Marcus made in 4 months, stood Vivian Ashford. She was 42 years old, and she had the kind of face that photographed beautifully and felt in person like a warning. Sharp jaw, eyes that calculated before they felt. She was beautiful the way a courtroom is beautiful, everything in it arranged to achieve a specific outcome. Right now, her outcome was composure. She was losing it. Derek. Her voice was quiet. That was how Marcus knew she was furious. People who were truly angry rarely needed to shout. Tell me something useful. Derek stood up from the engine bay. He had grease on his cuffs, a sin he clearly hadn't committed in years, and an expression that said he was about to say something he'd never said professionally before. Ms. Ashford, I have to be honest with you. I cannot identify the failure point. The electrical system reads completely clean on diagnostics. The fuel delivery appears functional. There is no mechanical obstruction that I can locate. The car simply refuses. Silence. Someone in the crowd coughed. So you're telling me, Vivian said, each word deliberate, that you flew in from London. You charged me $40,000 for the weekend. And your professional conclusion is that the car refuses. Move. Derek stepped aside. She turned to the crowd and smiled, the kind of smile that people in power wear when they're deciding what to do with their anger. It seems we've exhausted our options, ladies and gentlemen, unless anyone here has a suggestion. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Nervous. Performative. That's when someone pointed. What about him? Marcus had stopped at the edge of the gathering. He hadn't meant to be seen. He'd been trying to assess the situation from a distance, had caught the faint electromagnetic irregularity that Sophie had described, before he'd even gotten close, and was already turning the problem over in his mind, when the crowd parted just enough for Vivian Ashford's eyes to find him. He was wearing his work uniform. Dark green shirt with the estate logo on the chest. Worn boots. Sophie's hand in his left hand, her little notebook tucked under her arm. He did not belong in this picture. Every person in that crowd knew it immediately. Vivian looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. Then she smiled wider. Ah, she said. The groundskeeper. More laughter. Louder this time. What's your name? She called across the distance between them. Marcus, he said. I was just going to... Marcus. She repeated it like she was trying it on. Marcus, we have a problem. My father's Jaguar, a 1961 E-Type 1 of 49, ever produced, worth approximately $1.4 million, will not start. Derek here, who is internationally renowned, cannot fix it. Would you like to take a look? The question was not genuine. He could hear that. The whole crowd could hear it. She wasn't asking for help. She was creating entertainment. I appreciate the offer, Marcus said carefully, but I don't think... I'll pay you. She reached into the small clutch she carried and produced a handful of bills, folded but clearly substantial. Then she looked at him with eyes that had made boardrooms fall silent. Come on, Marcus. A man in your position could use the extra money, couldn't he? He felt Sophie's hand tighten around his fingers. He didn't move. Come now, Vivian said, her smile going sharp at the edges. Don't be proud. Pride is a luxury for people who can afford it. And then, and this was the moment that would replay in Marcus Bennett's memory for years, she threw the money. Not handed it to someone to deliver. Not set it on the hood of the car. Threw it. $50 bills fanning out across the cobblestone. Fluttering down like confetti at the worst party he'd ever attended. Landing at his feet, some of them, and scattering toward Sophie, whose eyes went wide and then went somewhere else entirely, somewhere interior, somewhere calm, the way they always did when she was working something out. The crowd went very quiet for 1 second. Then erupted. Not all cruelty. Some of it was just discomfort wearing laughter's clothing. But enough of it was genuine amusement at the spectacle of a working man standing in a pile of cash at a billionaire's charity gala, that Marcus felt the full weight of the moment settle on him like something physical. He looked at the money on the ground. He looked up at Vivian Ashford. He did not bend down. Pick it up, someone in the crowd said, followed by another laugh. Marcus? Vivian's voice had changed slightly. There was something in it now, a flicker of something that wasn't amusement. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the first faint edge of unease. I'm offering you an opportunity. You're offering me a performance, he said, quietly. Not angrily, just plainly the way a man speaks when he's already decided he has nothing to prove. Vivian blinked. That was all just a blink, half a second, but he caught it. Excuse me, I'm not going to pick that up, Marcus said. Not because of pride, because it's not mine. A murmur went through the crowd. Vivian studied him. The smile was still there, but it had gone still the way a surface goes still just before something moves beneath it. All right, she said slowly. Then let's try something else. She turned toward the Jaguar, then back to him, and when she smiled this time, it had the quality of someone doubling down on a bet they suddenly weren't sure about. Start it. Start my father's car right now in front of all these people, and I will personally... She paused, looked at the crowd, played to them the way people who have always had an audience learn to do. Marry you. The crowd exploded. Laughter, cheers, a few whistles. Someone shouted, "Go for it!" And someone else said something cruel about his uniform that Marcus chose not to hear. Vivian was still smiling, still performing, still absolutely certain he would either flee in embarrassment or attempt something that would fail publicly and give her the kind of story she could tell at next year's gala. Marcus didn't move for 3 seconds. Then he felt Sophie's hand release his. She walked forward. 9 years old, dark-haired, wearing the small blue sneakers she refused to replace because the left one had a scuff on it that she said looked like a sleeping fox. She walked past the crowd, past Derek and his grease-stained cuffs, past the fluttering bills on the cobblestone, and stopped beside the Jaguar's open hood. She stood there for a moment, her head tilted. "Daddy?" she said without turning around. Her voice was completely conversational, like they were back at the kitchen table with the oatmeal. "The car isn't broken." Silence. "Sophie," Marcus started. "It's crying," she said. Someone in the crowd laughed a single reflexive sound and then stopped because the little girl hadn't reacted to it at all, and somehow that was more disarming than anything else. "There's something near the battery," she said. "It's making everything confused." Marcus was already moving. He didn't hurry. He walked to the car the same way he walked every problem, with patience, with attention, with the specific quality of focus that his wife had once called his superpower and that he'd spent 7 years trying to pretend wasn't anything special. He didn't touch the engine immediately. He stood beside Sophie and he listened. Not to the car, to the field, the electromagnetic field. It was something he'd developed in a previous life, a sensitivity to signal interference that his colleagues had considered almost supernatural until he'd explained the physics of it, at which point they'd called it something more complicated and less interesting. His brain processed electrical signatures the way musicians process pitch, involuntarily, constantly, and right now something was wrong in the frequency 3 feet to the left of the battery terminal. "Derek," Marcus said without looking up. "Did anyone place a device phone tablet, anything wireless on the shelf behind the driver's seat in the last 48 hours? A pause. Then Derek's voice, careful. "There was a diagnostic transmitter placed there Thursday morning. It was removed Friday afternoon." "No," Marcus said. "It wasn't." He reached into the car. His hand found the small shelf behind the driver's seat, and beneath a folded cloth half hidden by shadow, his fingers closed around a compact wireless diagnostic transmitter that was still active, still broadcasting, a low-frequency pulse that was intercepting the car's ignition signal every time it tried to cycle. He pulled it out, set it on the cobblestone. Then he walked back to the front of the car, reached into the engine bay with both hands reconnected, a single ground wire that the transmitter's interference had caused to cycle loose over 48 hours of repeated ignition attempts, and stepped back. "Try it now," he said. Derek looked at him, looked at the key in his hand. Climbed in, turned the ignition. Yen the Jaguar, E-Type, 63 years old, worth $1.4 million, silent for 3 hours, while the world's foremost vintage automotive specialist stood over it in defeat, sang. The engine didn't just start. It opened. A low, perfect, sustained roar that rolled across the cobblestone and the manicured lawns and the champagne flutes and the formal wear like something that had been waiting a very long time to speak. Thunder shaking the stones. Shematum. And then, in the wake of its silence, 200 people stood completely still. Marcus picked up Sophie and held her against his side, and she put her arm around his neck, and neither of them looked at the crowd. They looked at the car, Sophie with a small, satisfied expression. Marcus with something that had no name for it, something old and quiet and not quite sadness and not quite pride. He heard the crowd recover before he heard anything else. The sound of 200 people recalibrating. The specific confused murmur of a group that had been prepared to laugh and had instead witnessed something they didn't have language for. Then he heard Vivian Ashford's heels on the cobblestone. She stopped 2 feet from him. He turned to face her. She was still beautiful, still composed in the technical sense. The expression was in place. The posture was correct. But something in her eyes had shifted. Something that looked, if he was reading her right, and he suspected he was like the very first moment of a woman who has spent her entire adult life in absolute control of every room she enters, realizing that the room has changed. "How," she said, "did you know? Your maintenance log shows the transmitter was signed out, but not signed back in," Marcus said. "I checked it last week when I was servicing the garage." Derek didn't catch that. Derek wasn't looking for interference. He was looking for mechanical failure. He paused. "They're different problems." Vivian looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at Sophie. "She said it was crying," Vivian said. "She says that time." Marcus agreed. "Is that—" Vivian stopped, started again. "Is that some kind of metaphor, or—" "She hears the way things are supposed to sound," Marcus said simply. "When something is off, she knows." Sophie, from her perch against his side, regarded Vivian Ashford with the direct, unblinking assessment of a child who had not yet learned that some people's approval was worth performing for. "Your necklace is making a sound too," Sophie said. Vivian's hand went instinctively to the diamond pendant at her throat. "It's not bad," Sophie clarified. "It's sad, like it misses something." The silence that followed was different from every other silence that had filled that courtyard in the last hour. This one had weight to it. Texture. Vivian Ashford. C. E.O. Heiress. one of the 73 wealthiest people in America, looked at a 9-year-old girl who had just said the truest thing anyone had said to her in years, and for exactly one moment, her face did something it almost never did in public. It broke. Just for a second. Just a fracture quickly repaired. But Marcus saw it. He set Sophie down and took her hand. "We'll get out of your way," he said. "Wait." The word came out differently than Vivian probably intended. Not commanding, something closer to uncertain. "Your name is Marcus what?" "Bennett." "Marcus Bennett." She said it the way she'd said his first name earlier, but without the performance in it this time. Just his name. Just the weight of needing to remember something. "You've worked on this estate for 5 years. 3 as maintenance supervisor, 2 before that. And before that?" He looked at her steadily. Before that, he said, was before that. He walked away from 200 people and 1 billionaire and a 1961 Jaguar E-Type that was still idling perfectly behind them. Sophie walked beside him, her notebook under her arm, her sleeping fox sneakers quiet on the cobblestone. They were almost out of earshot when Sophie looked up at him. "She's going to find out who you were," she said. "Probably," Marcus agreed. "Are you scared?" He thought about it honestly, the way he always tried to think about things when Sophie asked not the answer he wanted to give her, but the true one. "Not scared," he said finally. "Just tired of people who look at the past and think they know the whole story." Sophie considered this. "I think she's tired too," she said. "She just doesn't know it yet." Marcus looked down at her. This impossible child, this strange luminous gift that the worst years of his life had somehow produced. "When did you get so smart?" he asked. "I've always been smart," Sophie said. "You just worry too much to notice." He didn't sleep that night. Not because of the gala, or the crowd, or the money scattered on the cobblestone. He didn't sleep because he sat by Sophie's bed after she dropped off and watched her breathe, the way he'd watched her breathe since she was 3 days old, and the doctors had said the word stable for the first time, and he hadn't known how to respond to it because his wife was 2 rooms away, and not stable would never be stable again. 7 years. He'd rebuilt his whole life around the circumference of this child's life. Every decision leaving the career, leaving the city, leaving behind the version of himself that had once designed systems that held satellites in orbit, had been made with one question at its center. What does she need? She needed a father who was present. Not a father who was brilliant and absent. Not a father who was famous and traveling. Not a father who was chasing something so hard he forgot to look at what he already had. He'd made that choice at a graveside in March 7 years ago, and he had never regretted it. Not once. Not even tonight, standing in a pile of scattered $50 bills while 200 wealthy strangers laughed at him. He would do it all again. He would do it 1,000 times. His phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. "Mr. Bennett." Vivian Ashford's voice, stripped of the gala performance. Something quieter underneath it, not warm, not yet, but real. "I want to apologize." He sat very still. "Ms. Ashford, I behaved badly this evening. The money." A pause. The sound of someone choosing words more carefully than they're used to needing to. That was inexcusable. "It was," he said. Not cruelly, just truthfully. Another pause. Longer. "I had my assistant run a search on you," she said. "After you left." He'd expected that. Had been prepared for it in the abstract way you prepare for something you know is coming, but can't stop. "What did you find?" he said, though he already knew. "Enough," she said quietly, "to understand that I have been a significant fool." The Jaguar was still idling in his memory. The roar of it. The crowd going silent. "Good night, Miss Ashford," he said. "Mr. Bennett." Her voice caught on something. "Your daughter, what she said. About the necklace." He waited. "It was my father's," she said. "He gave it to me the last time I saw him. Before he—" She stopped. I don't know how she could have known that. "She doesn't know things," Marcus said gently. "She hears them. There's a difference." The line was quiet for a long time. When Vivian Ashford spoke again, her voice had lost the last of its performance. "I think," she said slowly, "that I've been very alone for a very long time, and I had completely forgotten what it sounds like when someone tells you the truth." Marcus looked at his daughter asleep in the dark. "Yeah," he said. "I know what that's like." He hung up. Outside, the estate was silent. The Jaguar finally at rest in its garage, the cobblestones empty of everything, the crowd, the champagne, the scattered bills that someone had quietly collected before the night was done. The stars were out. Sophie in her sleep smiled at something she was hearing that no one else could. And Marcus Bennett, maintenance worker, single father, the man nobody saw, sat in the dark and felt for the first time in 7 years like maybe the story wasn't over. Maybe it was just beginning. He didn't go back to sleep. After he hung up the phone, Marcus sat at the kitchen table until the sky outside turned from black to the particular gray-blue that meant 4 a.m., the hour that belonged to nobody, too late for the night owls, too early for the morning people. He made coffee he didn't want and drank it anyway, because the ritual of it helped him think, and there was a great deal to think about. Vivian Ashford knew who he was. Or rather, she knew who he had been. There was a distinction there that mattered enormously to him, even if the rest of the world wouldn't understand it. Yeah. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked at the dark outline of the main estate house, 300 yards away. Lights still on in the Upper West Wing. Her office he knew from 3 years of maintaining the property. The woman who had thrown money at his feet 8 hours ago was still awake, probably sitting behind a desk that cost more than his truck, reading about a version of Marcus Bennett that no longer existed. He wondered what she was feeling. Then he stopped wondering because it wasn't his problem. He rinsed his cup, checked on Sophie one more time, and went to bed. He slept for exactly 90 minutes before his alarm went off at 5:15 a.m. He made oatmeal. One with honey. One plain. Some things didn't change. Monday came the way Mondays always came on the estate, with a full maintenance log, 2 pending work orders, and the low-level social performance of pretending that Saturday hadn't happened. The other groundskeepers were careful around him. Too careful. The kind of careful that meant word had spread. A man named Daryl, who'd worked the grounds for 11 years and had the most reliable gossip network Marcus had ever seen in a non-military environment, fell into step beside him near the East Garden at 7:30 a.m. "So," Daryl said. "So," Marcus said. "Heard you fixed the car." Heard she threw money at you first." Marcus kept walking. "You heard right." Daryl was quiet for exactly 4 seconds, a record by Marcus's estimation. "And you didn't pick it up?" "No." "Man." Daryl exhaled through his teeth. "I don't know if that's the bravest thing I've ever heard or the dumbest." "Probably both." "She asked about you after." Marcus stopped walking, looked at Daryl directly. "What do you know?" Daryl had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "I know that Ms. Ashford's personal assistant called HR at 10 p.m. Saturday night. Asked for your complete employment file. Full background workup. The kind of pull they only do when—" He paused. "When they're interested in someone, and not in the getting fired kind of way." Marcus started walking again. "Stay out of it, Daryl." "I'm already out of it. I'm just—" "Out of it," Marcus said. Daryl peeled off toward the East Garden. Behind him, Marcus could feel the estate watching. Not metaphorically, literally. He'd noticed the security camera near the tool shed had been repositioned overnight, angled slightly differently than it had been Friday, pointed now toward the path he walked every morning. He noted it, filed it, kept moving. The summons came at 10:47 a.m. Not a phone call. A physical note hand-delivered by Vivian's assistant, a young woman named Claire, who always looked like she was managing 3 simultaneous catastrophes and had learned to do so without letting any of them reach her face. She handed him the folded card without comment and walked away at a pace that said she was already late for the next thing. He unfolded it. Mr. Bennett, my office 11. AMV Ashford. No please. No question mark. No acknowledgement that he might have obligations at 11 a.m. that didn't involve her office. He thought about not going. He went. He'd been inside the main house exactly 4 times in 5 years, twice for emergency electrical repairs, once for a burst pipe, once to drop off a safety report that the property manager had needed urgently. Each time he'd gone in, done the work, and left without engaging in anything beyond the task at hand. The house was by any measure extraordinary. He'd stopped noticing extraordinary a long time ago. What he noticed now, walking through the east corridor toward the executive wing, was the photograph. He'd walked past it before an enlarged black and white photograph on the wall near the library entrance. A man in his 50s, standing beside what was clearly a much younger version of the Jaguar E-Type. The man's hand rested on the hood with the particular tenderness that people usually reserved for things they loved more than they could say out loud. He paused. The man's face was unmistakable once you knew to look for it. Same jaw as Vivian. Same eyes, though in this man they looked softer, less armored. Richard Ashford, founder of Ashford Technologies, the man whose legacy his daughter was now running. The man whose necklace a 9-year-old girl had heard crying. Marcus stood there for 3 seconds longer than he meant to. Then he kept walking. Vivian's office was not what he expected. He'd built a picture of it in his mind. Polished impersonal, the kind of space that communicated power first and personality not at all. What he walked into instead was controlled chaos wearing formal clothing. 3 different whiteboards covered in diagrams and equations he recognized immediately and hadn't seen in 7 years. Stacks of technical documents on every surface. A desk that was clearly a battlefield, not a display piece. Satellite imagery printed on large sheets, pinned to a corkboard that took up most of one wall. He stopped just inside the doorway. He didn't mean to react. But the equations on the nearest whiteboard, he read them before he could stop himself, the way a musician reads sheet music involuntarily, and what he read made his stomach drop 3 inches. She was in serious trouble. She was standing out of the window with her back to him, phone pressed to her ear, voice clipped and controlled in the way of someone managing a crisis call, while also managing the knowledge that there's someone in the room she needs to deal with. I understand that, Gerald. What I'm telling you is that the current projection is wrong. The interference model is incomplete. I need more time. A pause. No. The board meeting is Thursday. That hasn't changed. I'll have answers by Thursday. She hung up without a farewell, turned around and looked at him. Sunday had done something to her appearance that Saturday's gala hadn't. She was still precisely dressed, still composed, but there was something beneath the composure that hadn't been there before. A tightness around her eyes. The particular quality of someone who has not slept in the right kind of way. You read the board, she said. Not a question. You should carry the frequency analysis out to the 4th decimal, he said. You're losing resolution at the 3rd. Her expression shifted, just slightly. You could see that from the doorway. It's a small room. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she pulled out the chair across from her desk and said, Sit down, Mr. Bennett. I have a maintenance schedule. I know your maintenance schedule. I've memorized your maintenance schedule. Sit down. He sat. She didn't apologize again. He appreciated that the phone call Saturday night had been the apology, and reopening it now would have made it smaller. Instead, she placed a file folder on the desk between them and pushed it toward him. He didn't touch it. You graduated MIT at 22, she said. Summa cum laude. Aerospace engineering with a dual concentration in electromagnetic systems and satellite communications. You were recruited directly from graduation by Meridian Defense, which, as I'm sure you know, is the most selective defense contractor in the country. You spent 8 years there, the last 4 as senior systems architect. She paused. You were the primary engineer on the Meridian 7 satellite program, which is currently considered the most sophisticated low-orbit communications network in American military history. Marcus said nothing. You left Meridian 9 years ago, she continued. Walked away from a career that people at the top of that field spend entire lifetimes trying to reach. No resignation letter, no counteroffer negotiation. You just... She stopped. Left. My wife died, he said. The bluntness of it landed in the room the way those things do, with a weight that no amount of preparation can soften. Vivian sat back slightly. I know, she said, and her voice had lost its briefing room quality. I'm sorry. I didn't include that in the... She gestured at the file. I wanted to hear it from you. Why? Because files don't tell you why, she said. They tell you what. And what I need right now is someone who can explain the why behind something that is about to cost me everything. She stood up, walked to the satellite imagery board, and Marcus looked at what was pinned there. He felt the blood drain from his face so slowly that it took him a full 4 seconds to realize it was happening. Tell me what you see, Vivian said. He was already out of his chair. He stood in front of the board and read. Not the summary data, the raw numbers underneath the ones that most executives never looked at because they trusted their engineers to translate them. Marcus didn't need translation. Your Lux 7 satellite cluster, he said. 17 birds in low Earth orbit commercial communications and GPS-adjacent positioning systems. He traced a line of numbers with one finger without touching the paper. You're losing signal coherence between units 4 through 9. The degradation started. He looked at a date stamp in the corner of one printout 6 weeks ago. Gradually enough that your initial diagnostics read it as atmospheric interference. It's not atmospheric, Vivian said. No. He stepped to the left, looked at another sheet. It's resonance feedback. The phased array on Unit 6 developed a micro-oscillation, probably a manufacturing tolerance issue, less than a millimeter, and because Units 5 through 8 are calibrated to each other, the feedback is propagating across the cluster. He paused. Like tuning forks. Vivian was very still. My engineers, she said carefully, have been working on this for 5 weeks. They have not reached that conclusion. Your engineers are looking at each satellite individually, Marcus said. The problem is the space between them. Silence. The space between them, she repeated. The interaction, the resonance between units. No individual diagnostic shows a critical failure because no individual unit has failed. The failure is in the relationship between them. He turned to look at her. It's going to cascade. Units 4 through 9 are going to lose synchronization completely within... He looked at the date stamps again. Did math he hadn't done in 7 years, and found with a faint chill that he still could. 11 days, maybe 12. Vivian Ashford sat down, much not gracefully, not with the controlled elegance of a woman who managed boardrooms and charity galas. She sat down the way people sit down when the floor has just moved under them without warning. My board meets Thursday, she said. If I go in there without a solution... They'll remove you, Marcus said. Yes. He stood at the satellite board and felt something he hadn't felt in 7 years. The specific terrible aliveness of a problem that only he could see completely. The particular weight of being the only person in a room who understands the shape of the disaster. He'd felt it before, many times in a previous life. He hadn't missed it. He wasn't sure, standing there, whether he missed it now. I can't help you with this, he said. Mr. Bennett. Marcus. Marcus. She leaned forward. I'm not asking you to come back to aerospace. I'm not asking you to join my company or change your life. I'm asking you to sit down with me and help me understand what I'm looking at and whether there is a solution that my engineers can actually implement. Mama Metimimo. Her voice was steady, but underneath it was something real, something that had nothing to do with power or performance, or the social architecture of wealth. 17 satellites. Hundreds of thousands of customers who depend on GPS positioning for everything from hospital systems to shipping routes to basic navigation. She paused. People will be hurt if this fails, not financially. Actually hurt. He knew that. He'd known it the moment he read the numbers. It was the only reason he was still standing there. I need to pick Sophie up at 3, he said. Vivian blinked. I'm sorry. My daughter, school ends at 3. I need to pick her up. Something crossed Vivian's face that he couldn't immediately name, something between surprise and a kind of disorientation, like a woman who has built her entire world around one set of priorities, suddenly confronting the existence of an entirely different set. Of course, she said. Of course. We have until 3. Marcus pulled out the chair he'd sat in before, turned it to face the satellite board, and sat down. Get me a pencil, he said. Not a pen. Pencil. Vivian Ashford, CEO of Ashford Technologies. Heiress to $1 billion legacy. The woman who had thrown money at his feet 48 hours ago got up, opened a drawer, and brought him a pencil. He started writing. 3 hours and 40 minutes. That was how long they worked before Marcus looked at his watch and said, I need to go, and meant it without apology or negotiation. In that 3 hours and 40 minutes, he had filled 6 sheets of paper with calculations that Vivian photographed with her phone because she recognized watching him work that she was witnessing something she might not be able to replicate. He had identified not just the resonance cascade, but the precise sequence in which it would propagate, and more importantly, the single intervention point at which the entire system could be stabilized, not by replacing the satellites, not by the $2 billion system overhaul his engineers had been quietly pricing out in the background of their diagnostic work, by recalibrating the phased array on Unit 6 remotely, adjusting the oscillation frequency by 0.003 degrees. That was it. That was the whole answer. 3 hours of work to find a fix that would have taken his team at Meridian 2 days, maybe 3. Vivian sat across from him as he gathered his notes and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, How? How what? How do you still? She stopped, started again. You've been maintaining grounds for 5 years. You've been away from this field for 9. How do you still do that? Marcus looked at her steadily. I never stopped thinking, he said. I just stopped letting it be the most important thing. He stood up. She stood up. They faced each other across the desk with its scattered sheets and its pencil marks and the particular residue of genuine collaborative work, which is different from every other kind of work in the way that it leaves something between people, a shared language, a temporary bridge. Thursday, she said. Can I present this to the board Thursday? It's your problem to solve. Yes. I'll need to be able to answer questions, technical questions. If the board pushes back, send me the questions in advance. He picked up his jacket. I'll give you the answers. And if they ask who helped you, he paused. Tell them you figured it out, he said. I don't need the credit. Vivian Ashford looked at him with an expression that he was beginning to recognize as her unguarded face, the one that existed before she remembered to perform. It was younger than her public face, more uncertain, more honest. Most people would want the credit, she said. Most people need it, he said. I don't. He walked toward the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. One thing, he said without turning around. Yes. Your father's satellite program, the one he was working on before he died. He had seen the reference in one of the pinned documents, a project designation he'd recognized not from his own work, but from the broader industry history he carried in the back of his mind like a loaded map. The Lux series is built on his original frequency architecture, isn't it? A very long pause. Yes, Vivian said. Her voice had changed completely. He was right, Marcus said. The base architecture is sound. The problem your engineers hit this week is a manufacturing deviation, not a design flaw. His original vision was correct. He heard her breath catch. He walked out. Sophie was waiting outside the school gate with her backpack and her notebook and her sleeping fox sneakers, and the expression of a child who has already processed her entire school day and is ready to discuss it in full. "You saw her again," she said before he could say anything. "How do you know that? You're walking differently." He looked down at his feet, then back at her. "I walk the same way every day." "No, you don't." She fell into step beside him. "Usually you walk like someone carrying something heavy, but you're used to it. Right now, you walk like someone who just put something down and isn't sure if they should have." Marcus was quiet for half a block. "She has a satellite problem," he said. "I know." He stopped walking, looked at her. "Sophie?" "Daryl told Mrs. Liu, who told the lunch monitors," she said serenely. "It's a small estate." He started walking again. "I helped her look at it. The math. And I showed her where the problem was." "And now you feel guilty," Sophie said. "Why would I feel guilty?" "Because you liked it," she said simply. "And you think you're not supposed to anymore." He didn't answer her for the rest of the walk home. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because the answer was yes, and saying it out loud to his 9-year-old felt like admitting something he hadn't given himself permission to admit yet. Batis. He made dinner. Sophie did her homework at the table. He washed dishes while she read, and the house settled around them the way it always did in the evenings. The small, reliable rhythms of a life built on purpose, on presence, on the deliberate choice to be exactly here. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from an unknown number, but he recognized the style immediately. Vivian Ashford communicated in complete sentences, even in text. No abbreviations, no shortcuts. "I told my lead engineer the fix. He ran the numbers. He called me back in 12 minutes and said, and I quote, 'Ms. Ashford, whoever figured this out is not human. I thought you should know.'" He almost put the phone down without responding. Almost. He typed back, "He's close. Get some sleep before Thursday." Her response came back in 40 seconds. "I don't really sleep." He looked at the text for a moment, then typed, "You should try it. It helps with the frequency analysis." A pause. Then was that a joke? He set the phone face down on the counter and listened to Sophie reading aloud from her book in the next room, her voice running over the sentences, with the particular pleasure of a child who has not yet been taught to read silently. He realized he was almost smiling. He hadn't almost smiled at something unrelated to Sophie in a very long time. Wednesday night, he was in the garage. His own small garage, the one attached to the cottage, working on a water pump motor that had been giving the irrigation system trouble. It was 9 p.m. Sophie was asleep. The garage was lit by a single overhead lamp, and the radio was playing something he wasn't consciously listening to, and he was in the particular state of mechanical absorption that he'd always found more restful than actual rest. He heard footsteps on the gravel outside, unhurried, deliberate, the footsteps of someone who had made a decision before they started walking. Vivian Ashford appeared in the garage doorway. She was not dressed for the estate. She was dressed the way Marcus suspected she dressed when there was nobody to perform for dark trousers, a plain, dark jacket hair down for the first time he'd seen it. She looked without the armor of her public presentation approximately like a human being. "It's 9 p.m., he said. "I know. Sophie's asleep. I wasn't going to knock. She paused. "I was walking. I do that when I can't settle. I ended up here." He looked at her for a moment. Then he moved a toolbox off the second shop stool and set it against the wall in an invitation that wasn't quite warm and wasn't quite cold. She sat. He went back to the water pump. She watched him work in silence for nearly 2 minutes, which was, he sensed, unusual for her. Then she said, "Tell me about her. Your wife." His hands didn't stop moving. "Why?" "Because you left everything for her. And then you stayed everywhere for your daughter. And I'm trying to understand." She stopped. "I'm trying to understand what that kind of love looks like from the outside. Because I'm not sure I've ever seen it." He set down the wrench. "Her name was Elaine," he said. "She was a middle school science teacher. She thought the most important thing in the world was teaching 12-year-olds that the universe made sense, that it had rules, that understanding the rules was a kind of power." He paused. "She was better at her job than I ever was at mine." Vivian said nothing. She was doing, he realized, what very few powerful people know how to do. She was listening without preparing her response. "She got sick when Sophie was 2, he said. By the time Sophie was 3, she was gone. He picked up the wrench again but didn't use it, just held it. "I was in Dallas when she died. Meridian had a critical systems failure, and I was the only person who could fix it, and she told me to go. She told me to go." He felt the familiar old guilt move through him like a river changing course. Something that had once felt like drowning and now felt more like weather. Present, real, manageable. "I fixed the satellite system from a hotel room in Dallas. She died at 4:14 a.m. in a hospital room in Boston. I didn't make it back in time." The garage was very quiet. "After that," he said, "I decided that no satellite, no career, no achievement, no professional legacy was ever going to be more important than being where Sophie needed me to be. So I stopped." He finally put the wrench to use, made the adjustment he'd been working toward, set it down. "And I've never regretted it. Not for one day." Vivian was looking at her hands. "My father died on a Tuesday," she said, and her voice was different, stripped of everything professional, everything performed. "I was in Singapore, closing a deal that I thought was the most important thing I'd ever done. He had a stroke. It was fast, the doctors said. He wouldn't have known." She swallowed. "I made it back in time for the funeral, but not—" She stopped. "Not in time for him to still be there." She looked up. "I've run his company for 6 years, she said. "Every decision I've made since the day I took over, I've made it thinking about whether he would approve, whether I'm protecting what he built." Her voice dropped. "The necklace, what your daughter said." She touched the pendant at her throat. "He gave it to me the last time I saw him, when I was leaving for Singapore. I was in such a hurry. I almost didn't stop to hug him. I almost—" She stopped. The single lamp in the garage flickered once. Something electrical in the walls. Probably Marcus had been meaning to check the wiring in the cottage for 3 weeks. But in the silence of that moment, in the space between two people sitting with the weight of the years they'd lost, the flicker felt like something else. Sophie from somewhere inside the cottage made a small sound in her sleep. Comfortable, settled. Vivian Ashford pressed her fingers against her father's necklace and said nothing. And Marcus Bennett, who had spent 9 years learning how to be alone without being lonely, recognized in the woman across from him something he understood completely, a person who had been lonely for so long they'd forgotten it had a name. "The board meeting is tomorrow," he said. "Yes." "You know the material cold?" "Yes." "Then you'll be fine." She nodded, stood, smoothed her jacket with the automatic gesture of someone restoring their armor. "Marcus," she said. "Yeah." "Thank you." Not for the satellite problem, not for the equations. He could hear the specificity of it. What she was thanking him for was this: the garage, the lamp, the conversation she'd walked through the dark to find. "Get some sleep," he said. She almost smiled. "I'll try," she said, He listened to her footsteps go back across the gravel until the night swallowed them. Then he finished fixing the water pump, turned off the lamp, and went inside to check on his daughter, who was sleeping with her notebook open across her chest. A page full of small, careful drawings, machines and stars, and two figures he couldn't quite make out sitting across from each other in what might have been a small lit room. He closed the notebook carefully, set it on her nightstand, pulled the blanket up. "Good night, Bug," he said quietly. Sophie, in the deep waters of sleep, didn't answer, but she smiled. Thursday came. Marcus was on the west side of the estate when his phone buzzed at 2:17 p.m., right in the middle of replacing a section of irrigation pipe that had been on his work order for 10 days, and that he'd been putting off with the unconscious superstition of someone who doesn't want to normalize a routine that feels like it might be changing. The text was 2 words. "We won." He read it once, put the phone back in his pocket, went back to the irrigation pipe. Daryl appeared at his elbow 12 minutes later, breathing like he'd jogged across the property. "Did you hear?" "Hear what?" "The board meeting." Daryl's eyes were wide. Ms. Ashford went in there with a complete solution, presented the whole fix. Board voted unanimously to keep her as CEO and approved the system recalibration. The investors who were pulling out are back in. He paused for dramatic effect. People are saying it's the most technically comprehensive presentation she's ever given. Marcus kept working. "Good for her," he said. "Marcus." Daryl crouched down to his eye level. "People are asking who helped her. Her lead engineer told someone that the solution came from outside the company. Word is spreading." Marcus pulled a section of old pipe free. "Hand me the coupling." "Did you hear what I said?" "Coupling Daryl." Daryl handed him the coupling, watched him work, then said quietly, "You're really not going to tell anyone, are you?" "Tell anyone what?" Daryl shook his head slowly. "Man," he said with something in his voice that was part confusion and part something else, something that looked, if Marcus had been paying more attention, a lot like respect. He kept working. "Ma'am, the sun was high, and the grass smelled like cut summer. And somewhere on the other side of the estate, a billion-dollar company had just been pulled back from the edge of collapse by a calculation done in pencil by a maintenance worker who just needed to pick up his daughter at 3. Marcus tightened the coupling, checked the seal, turned the test valve. Water clean and steady. He stood up, brushed the dirt off his knees, and started on the next section. The week after the board meeting was the quietest week Marcus had experienced in months, and he didn't trust it. Quiet on the estate had a texture to it, the kind that preceded change the way air pressure drops before weather arrives. He'd learned to read it over 5 years of working the grounds the same way he'd learned to read electromagnetic interference and resonance feedback, and all the other invisible forces that moved through systems and revealed themselves only to people who knew how to pay attention. Something was coming. He just didn't know from which direction. It came from 2 directions simultaneously, which was how life usually ambushed the people who were paying the most careful attention. The first direction was expected. On Monday morning, 9 days after the board meeting, Claire, Vivian's assistant, the woman who managed simultaneous catastrophes without letting them reach her face, appeared at the maintenance shed at 7:45 a.m. and handed Marcus a sealed envelope. Not a folded note this time. A sealed envelope, formal, with his name written on the front in handwriting he now recognized. He didn't open it immediately. He tucked it in his jacket pocket and finished his morning inspection of the irrigation system he'd repaired the week before. He checked the couplings, tested the pressure, noted 2 sections that would need attention before fall. Then he walked to the east garden, sat on the bench near the old stone wall where nobody ever came before 9, and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper. At the top, the Ashford Technologies letterhead. Below that, a job offer. Not maintenance supervisor, not technical consultant, director of systems architecture. A position that would report directly to the CEO with a mandate to lead the complete redesign of the Lux satellite cluster's core frequency architecture, the project that Vivian's father had started and never finished. The salary at the bottom of the page had 7 figures. Marcus read it twice, folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope. Then he sat for a while and watched the morning light move across the garden wall and thought about Elaine, which was what he always did when a decision was trying to make itself known to him before he was ready for it. "What do you want?" she used to ask him. Not what should you want, not what makes sense. What do you actually want, Marcus, if you strip away everything else? And he knew the answer. He'd known it the moment he'd read the equations on Vivian's whiteboard and felt that specific aliveness that he hadn't felt in 9 years. He also knew that wanting something and being ready for it were 2 entirely different conversations. He put the envelope back in his pocket and went to work. The second direction came at 3:07 p.m. from the parking lot of Sophie's school. He was waiting by the gate, the way he always waited, slightly apart from the other parents, close enough to see the door, far enough to have a moment alone, before the full force of Sophie's personality made solitude impossible when a black car pulled up and parked directly beside his truck. The man who got out was wearing a suit that cost more than Marcus's truck, and he had the particular bearing of someone who had spent his career in rooms where everyone else was also wearing suits that cost too much. 60-something. Silver hair. A face that was handsome in the way that authority sometimes makes a face handsome. Not structure, but certainty. Marcus recognized him from photographs. Gerald Harmon, chairman of the Ashford Technologies Board of Directors. Marcus watched him approach with the stillness of someone who has already decided not to be surprised. "Mr. Bennett," Harmon said, extending his hand. "Gerald Harmon." "I know who you are." Marcus shook his hand. "How did you know where I'd be?" "I asked Claire." Harmon smiled, the practiced smile of a man who had been strategic for so long that strategy had become his native language. "She was discreet about it. Don't be annoyed with her." "I'm not annoyed," Marcus said. "I'm waiting for my daughter, of course." Harmon stood beside him, apparently content to wait alongside him, which was either genuine patience or a very good performance of it. "I'll be brief. I'm on the board, as you know. I was in the meeting when Vivian presented your solution." He paused. "It was your solution. I've been in technology investment for 31 years. I know the difference between a CEO who understands her engineers and an engineer presenting their own work through a very good intermediary." Marcus said nothing. "I'm not here to cause problems," Harmon said. "I'm here because I want to know something." He turned to face Marcus directly. "Vivian made you an offer this morning." "That's between me and Ms. Ashford." "Yes, it is." Harmon nodded. "I'm making you a different one." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a business card. Heavy stock, simple design, the kind that didn't need to announce itself. "I represent 3 other technology investment groups outside of Ashford. Any one of them would make you a founding partner with full equity stake to bring your frequency architecture expertise into their satellite programs." He held out the card. "More money than Vivian is offering. More autonomy. No." He paused carefully. "Complications." Marcus looked at the card. Didn't take it. "What complications?" he said. Harmon studied him. "Vivian Ashford is a complicated woman, Mr. Bennett. She's also whether she intends to be or not becoming personally interested in you. That creates a dynamic that in my experience rarely ends well for the less powerful party in the equation." The school door opened across the parking lot, releasing a wave of children. Marcus watched for Sophie's dark hair. "Mr. Harmon," he said without heat. "I'm going to tell you something as clearly as I can. I am not available to be a piece in someone else's positioning. Not Vivian's, not yours, not any investment group's. I'm a maintenance worker who helped someone solve a problem." He found Sophie in the crowd, backpack, notebook, sleeping fox sneakers, already scanning the parking lot for him. "That's all it was." Harmon looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Men who believe that never end up working in maintenance." Sophie reached him, grabbed his hand, looked up at Harmon with the direct assessment she gave everyone. "You smell like airplane," she said. Harmon blinked. Yes, I flew in this morning. You've been traveling a lot, Sophie said, not unkindly. Your body doesn't know what time it is. A pause. That's correct, Harmon said. You should eat something warm, Sophie told him. It helps. She looked up at Marcus. Can we get soup for dinner? Marcus took her hand. Yeah, he said. We can get soup. He nodded at Harmon, walked to his truck, didn't look back. But he felt Harmon watching them all the way out of the parking lot with the expression of a man who had just encountered something his 31 years of strategic experience hadn't fully prepared him for. He told Vivian about the conversation the next morning. Not immediately, he thought about it overnight, weighed it, considered his obligations, and decided that transparency was simpler than strategy and that he was too old and too tired for the alternative. He texted her at 6 a.m. Gerald Harmon came to Sophie's school yesterday. You should know. Her response took 4 minutes, which for Vivian Ashford at 6 a.m. meant she'd had to process something significant before she could form words. I'll call you in 10. She called in 7. Tell me exactly what he said. Her voice had the very specific quality of someone being extremely controlled in the presence of something that genuinely enrages them. He told her, word for word, the way he remembered things, which was accurately and completely a skill that had served him well in engineering and poorly in relationships, because the people who love you don't always want perfect recall, they want mercy. When he finished, the line was quiet for 4 seconds. He went to my daughter's school, Vivian said. He was in a public parking lot. He found out your schedule from my assistant. He said Claire was discreet. Don't. I'm not angry at Claire. Her voice dropped. I'm angry because he knew. He's known for 2 weeks that you were the one who solved it, and instead of coming to me, he went around me and... A sharp exhale. This is Gerald. This is exactly how Gerald operates. He did this to my father too. Every time my father had something Gerald wanted access to, Gerald found a way to insert himself into the conversation before my father could protect it. Marcus was quiet. You're not a thing to be protected, he said. I know that. I meant... She stopped. I'm handling this badly. A little bit. Don't be reasonable at me right now, Marcus. I'm trying to be furious. He almost smiled. Harmon's right that people are going to figure out the solution came from outside the company. If that's a problem for you. It's not a problem. You helped me, that's... Vivian. What? Is it going to be a problem professionally if people know I'm involved? A pause, longer than the others. Some people will use it to question the validity of the fix, she said. If they frame it as the CEO bringing in a maintenance worker who happened to be good at math, they'll say the solution hasn't been properly vetted. They'll call for an independent review, and that buys them 3 weeks to... She stopped. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to hide the fact that you helped me. I'm not asking you to hide it, Marcus said. I'm asking you to be prepared for what comes when it's known. Another pause. Are you prepared? She said. Because it's your life that changes, not mine. He thought about that. Sophie came into the kitchen in her pajamas, hair wild, making directly for the oatmeal. He watched her reach for the honey without looking the automatic confidence of someone who knows exactly where everything she needs is kept. I'll let you know, he said, about the offer. Take your time, she said, and meant it, and he could hear that she meant it, which was progress. He talked to Sophie about it that night. Not in the abstract, directly, plainly, the way he'd always talked to her about hard things, because she was 9, and she was also somehow older than 9, in the specific places where it mattered. They were doing dishes. He washed, she dried, which was their system. She was precise with a dish towel in a way that suggested she found it meditative. That lady from the party wants me to go work for her company, he said. Sophie dried a bowl. I know. Daryl. Mrs. Liu, she heard from... Never mind. He handed her a mug. What do you think? Sophie thought about it with the seriousness she applied to all real questions. I think you miss it, she said. Miss what? Fixing the big things. She set the mug on the rack. You fix things here too, but the big things, the satellite stuff, that's different, right? That's like... She searched for words. When you find a really, really hard puzzle. And it's the kind that makes your brain feel awake. He handed her a plate. Yeah, he said. Something like that. Mom would want you to do it, Sophie said. His hands went still in the water. Sophie. She would, Sophie said, and her voice had that certainty in it, not the certainty of a child making things up, but the certainty of someone who has thought carefully about something real. She didn't want you to stop. She wanted you to be there. Those are different things. He didn't say anything for a moment. When did you get so much like her? He said. Sophie considered this with great seriousness. I've always been like her, she said. You just keep being surprised by it. He laughed, a real one from somewhere that didn't get a lot of use. Sophie looked up at him when she heard it and smiled, and it was Elaine's smile, exactly the one that had leveled him across a crowded campus cafeteria 20 years ago and had never quite stopped. He went to see Vivian the next morning and told her he needed a condition before he could answer. They were in her office. She was at her desk. He was standing. He never seemed to sit in her office when he had something important to say she'd noticed. Like sitting would commit him to something he wasn't ready to commit to. What condition? She said. I'm still picking Sophie up at 3, he said. Every day. Non-negotiable. I'm not traveling without her. I'm not in a server room at midnight. I work the hours I work, and I am where I need to be, and the job exists inside that structure, not the other way around. Vivian looked at him. That's it, she said. That's it. Marcus, those are the most reasonable employment conditions I've ever heard. Then why does every high-level job I've ever seen make them impossible? She had no answer for that. She knew it, and he knew she knew it. Done, she said. All of it. I'll put it in the contract. He nodded. There's one more thing, he said. Of course there is. Harmon. Her expression tightened. I'll handle Gerald. I know you will. That's not what I'm saying. He met her eyes. He's going to try to use me as a wedge. Between you and the board, between you and your engineers, between you and the company's credibility. If you give me this role, it needs to be announced in a way that closes that door before he can open it. He paused. Your father's project, the original frequency architecture. Announce that the Lux recalibration succeeded because it returned to your father's foundational design. You're not bringing in an outside engineer, you're completing Richard Ashford's vision. And Vivian was very still. That's not just politics, she said slowly. That's... She stopped. That's actually true. Yes, he said. The best strategy usually is. She looked at him for a long moment. My father would have liked you, she said. Marcus picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. He sounds like he was a man who paid attention, he said. I find I like most of those. He was at the door when her voice stopped him. Marcus. Something in her tone, a register he hadn't heard from her before. Not professional. Not the stripped-down honesty of the garage and the lamplight. Something more careful. More exposed. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. He turned. The joke I made, she said. At the gala, when I said I'd marry you. She held his gaze without flinching, which cost her something. He could see it in the careful stillness of her expression. I know it was cruel. I know it was theater. But I want you to know. She stopped, started again. I want you to know that whatever this is, whatever we're building here professionally or otherwise, I am aware that I am not starting from a position of... Her jaw tightened. I'm aware that I owe you more than a satellite fix and a job offer, and I'm not sure I know how to... Vivian, he said. I'm trying to say something. I know, you're saying it. He looked at her, this brilliant, armored, occasionally ruthless, genuinely searching woman, and said with the plainness that was his native language, "You don't owe me anything. You gave me a problem that reminded me what I'm for. That's not a debt, that's a gift." She blinked. "That's a very Marcus Bennett thing to say," she said. "Yeah." He opened the door. "See you Monday." The announcement went out on Friday. Vivian handled it the way Marcus had suggested, threading the needle between corporate press release and genuine family legacy, Ashford Technologies, completing the foundational work of its founder, with the appointment of Marcus Bennett as Director of Systems Architecture to lead the effort. A brief biography accompanied the announcement. It included MYT Meridian Defense and the Meridian 7 program. It did not include maintenance supervisor. Marcus read it on his phone while sitting in Sophie's school parking lot waiting for 3 o'clock. His phone rang before he could finish the article. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. He answered. "Marcus Bennett." The voice was male, older, with the cadence of someone who had worked in aerospace for a very long time. "I'm Frank DeLuca. I was chief engineer at Meridian when you were there." Marcus straightened in the driver's seat. "Frank, I just read the Ashford announcement." A pause. "I need you to know something, and I need you to know it before you start this job." Frank. The Lux Satellite Cluster, 17 Birds commercial GPS network based on Ashford Sr.'s original architecture. His voice had changed something underneath the words that Marcus recognized as urgency. "I know that architecture, Marcus. I've seen similar systems, and if what I'm thinking is true, the recalibration you ran last week was a fix. But it's not the whole problem." The parking lot was filling with parents. The school door was still closed. Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. "What are you talking about, Frank?" "There's a secondary resonance signature in the Ashford architecture. Richard Ashford knew about it. It's in his original project notes, which apparently nobody at the company has read in 6 years. The oscillation you corrected on Unit 6, that was the first symptom." A beat. "The original design has a fundamental frequency conflict built into it at scale. It doesn't show up until you have more than 20 satellites in the network." "Lux has 17, Marcus said. "Right, but Phase 3 of the expansion plan." Marcus was already doing math he hadn't needed to do in 9 years. "Puts them at 23, he said. "By January," Frank said. "Yes." The school door opened across the parking lot. Children poured out. Marcus watched for Sophie without registering that he was watching. "If the secondary resonance triggers at scale," he said carefully, "what's the failure window?" Frank was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. "Complete network loss," he said. "Not gradual, not recoverable. Total cascade failure across all 23 units, simultaneously." Marcus said nothing. Marcus said, "GPS systems, Marcus. Commercial and adjacent military. You know what's running on networks like that. Shipping, hospitals, infrastructure, emergency services." Frank's voice was steady, but underneath it was something that Marcus recognized, the specific fear of an engineer who can see a disaster coming and doesn't know if he has time to stop it. "When did you figure this out?" Marcus said. 3 days ago. I was at a conference, someone mentioned the Lux recalibration, and I did the math on a cocktail napkin." A pause. "I know how that sounds. It sounds exactly like how I figured out the resonance problem in the first place." "Then you know I'm not wrong." Sophie appeared in the crowd. Backpack, notebook, sleeping fox sneakers. She was looking for him, and when she found his truck, she changed direction without breaking stride, and Marcus watched her and felt the full, complicated weight of what he was holding in his hand. A new job that he hadn't started yet. A problem that made the last one look like a warm-up. A company that had just announced his appointment in front of the entire industry, and a 9-year-old walking across a parking lot who trusted him to always be there. "Frank," he said. "Yeah." Send me the project notes. Richard Ashford's originals. Whatever you have. Already sent. Your Ashford email, I got it from the announcement. Sophie reached the truck, climbed in, looked at him with those eyes that read everything. She looked at the phone in his hand, at his face, at whatever was there that she could hear without being told. Is it the satellites again? She said. He put the phone in his pocket. Yeah, Bug, he said. The satellites again. She buckled her seatbelt with a click. Worse this time. He started the truck. Yeah, he said. Worse this time. Sophie opened her notebook to a fresh page. Okay, she said. Tell me what you know and I'll write it down. 2 heads are better. He looked at her. His impossible daughter. His greatest achievement in a life that had once measured achievement in satellite orbits and security clearances. You're 9, he said. I'm 9.5, she said. And last time I found the transmitter, so. He pulled out of the parking lot. The outside, the sky was the particular shade of late afternoon blue that meant the day was hinging toward something else. Marcus drove and thought, and somewhere in the back of his mind, the math was already running the frequency conflict, the cascade model, the 17 satellites that were currently stable, and the 23 that would not be. He had a job that started Monday. He had a problem that didn't have the decency to wait until Monday. And he had a daughter with a notebook and a pencil who was already writing things down. What does it sound like? She said without looking up from the page. She always asked that not, what does it look like? What does it calculate to what does the data say? What does it sound like? Marcus thought about Frank's words. The secondary resonance. The fundamental frequency conflict built into the architecture of a dead man's dream, invisible at small scale, catastrophic at full deployment. Like something's been trying to say something for a very long time, he said. And nobody's been close enough to hear it. Sophie's pencil stopped moving. She looked up at him. We should listen then, she said. Marcus drove toward home. Behind them, invisible and orbiting at 17 points above the Earth, 17 satellites held their positions, and their coherence, and their temporary stability. 17 pieces of a system that was about to demand everything Marcus Bennett had left to give. De Buim. And this time, the whole world would be watching. Frank DeLuca's email arrived at 4:23 p.m., 17 minutes after Marcus got home. Don't. He stood at the kitchen counter, reading it on his phone, while Sophie made herself a snack, with the focused independence of a child who has learned not to interrupt her father when his face does what it was currently doing. The email contained 3 attachments. The first was a scanned PDF, 47 pages of handwritten engineering notes in the tight, precise script of a man who thought faster than he could type. The second was a frequency modeling file that Marcus recognized as the kind of proprietary format Meridian had used in the early 2000s, which meant Richard Ashford had either worked with Meridian at some point or had been brilliant enough to independently develop a nearly identical methodology. The third was a single page, a letter, handwritten dated 11 years ago, addressed to nobody in particular, in the way that people sometimes write things they need to say before they figure out who needs to hear them. Marcus read the letter last. He read it standing at the kitchen counter with Sophie eating crackers 4 feet away, and by the third paragraph his hand had flattened against the counter the way it did when something required him to be very still. Richard Ashford had known. Not about the manufacturing tolerance on Unit 6. Not about the resonance cascade that his daughter's engineers had spent 5 weeks misdiagnosing. He'd known about the deeper thing, the fundamental frequency conflict that Frank had calculated on a cocktail napkin 3 days ago. Richard had known about it for years. He'd written it in these notes. He'd built a correction architecture into the original design, a secondary calibration system that would have addressed the conflict automatically at scale. And then he'd died before he could tell anyone it existed. Marcus set his phone face down on the counter. Dad. Sophie's voice. Quiet, careful, the register she used when she was reading him accurately. What is it? He turned around, looked at her cracker in hand eyes, completely steady, waiting. Her father figured it out, Marcus said. Years ago. He had the answer. It's in his notes. Sophie's cracker stopped halfway to her mouth. And nobody found it. Nobody read the notes, he said. 6 years of running his company, and nobody sat down with his original engineering journals. Sophie put the cracker down. She doesn't know, Sophie said. No. You have to tell her. Yes. Tonight. He picked up his phone. Right now, he said. Vivian answered on the second ring, which meant she'd been waiting for something the way people wait when they know the day isn't finished with them yet. I need you to find your father's original project archive, Marcus said without preamble. Not the digital files, the physical notebooks, the ones he kept by hand. A pause. Marcus, what? Where would they be? His study. I haven't been in his study since we converted it to a storage room after he died. His personal things are boxed. Claire inventoried them, but I never... She stopped. Why? What did you find? Your father solved the secondary resonance problem, Marcus said. He built a correction architecture into the original design. It's in his notes. But it was never implemented because no one knew it was there. The silence on the line was total. The kind of silence that has weight and shape. He knew, Vivian said. Not a question. The way someone says something when the world they've been living in just shifted 3 degrees under their feet, and the version of events they've been carrying turns out to be incomplete in a way that changes everything. He knew, Marcus said. And he had the fix. Written out detailed, probably close to implementation ready if his engineering notes are as thorough as the ones Frank sent me. Frank DeLuca sent you. Another pause. How does Frank DeLuca have my father's notes? He doesn't. He has modeling files that match your father's architecture. I think your father may have corresponded with Frank at some point, or their work was parallel. That's a question for later. Marcus moved to the table, sat down, opened the scanned PDF on his tablet. Right now I need you to find those notebooks. Tonight if you can. Tonight, Vivian repeated, and she sounded like someone in the specific shock of a person who has just been handed something they'd given up on finding. Marcus, if what you're saying is true, if my father's correction architecture exists, and it's complete, then the cascade failure isn't inevitable, Marcus said. But we need to know what's in those notebooks before we tell anyone else this exists. Before Harmon, before the board, before the engineering team. We need to understand what your father built before anyone else starts making decisions about it. Another silence. Shorter this time. She was moving already, he could hear it, the shift in the acoustic quality of the call, as she stood up, walked. Give me 20 minutes, she said. I'll be here. He looked across the table. Sophie had brought her notebook. She was already sketching small, precise diagrams that looked from across the table like satellite positions in a grid pattern. She'd been listening to everything. She found it yet, Sophie said without looking up. She's looking. Sophie nodded, kept drawing. Marcus opened Richard Ashford's scanned notes and started from the beginning. 41 minutes later, not 20, because nothing involving a converted storage room full of a dead man's boxed life takes 20 minutes. Utz's phone buzzed. Not a call. A text, Utz's phone buzzed. Not a call. A photograph. A notebook. Old cloth-bound, dark blue, the spine cracked from use. On the first page, in the same tight, precise handwriting as the scanned files, Lux Architecture Frequency Systems, phase complete. Below that, a date. 11 years ago. 3 months before Richard Ashford died. Marcus stared at the photograph for 3 seconds. Then he called her back. She answered before the first ring finished. It exists, she said, and her voice had something in it he'd never heard from her before. A rawness, the sound of a woman holding something she'd thought was lost. There are 4 notebooks. This is the last one. The others I'm going through them now, they're the complete developmental record. Everything. He heard paper turning. Marcus, there are equations in here I've never seen in any of the company documentation. He was doing work that never made it into the official project files. He was protecting it, Marcus said. From what happens to unfinished ideas when their creators die, Marcus said. People misread them, misuse them, or just ignore them because they don't understand what they're looking at. He paused. He was probably planning to present it when the architecture was complete. He just ran out of time. The line was quiet. He could hear Vivian breathing. He was alone in that study for the last 2 years of his life, she said. After the company went public, after I took on more of the operational management, I thought he was retired. I thought he was resting. Her voice broke on the last word. Not dramatically, just the small specific fracture of someone who has been carrying a particular guilt for a long time and has just been handed a reason to reframe it. He was still working. He was finishing something, Marcus said quietly. That's different from not letting go. He was finishing it for you. Another silence. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier, rebuilt. How soon can you look at the notebooks? How soon can you bring them to me? A pause. I can be at the cottage in 15 minutes. Sophie's still up. I know. I'd like her to... Vivian stopped. Is that all right? I think I'd like her to be there. When I look at these... Marcus looked at Sophie across the table. Sophie had looked up from her notebook. She'd heard. She nodded once. 15 minutes, Marcus said. Vivian arrived in 14. She was carrying 4 notebooks against her chest, the way people carry things they are afraid to set down, and she sat at Marcus's kitchen table without waiting to be invited, and set the notebooks on the table and pressed both palms flat against the top one, like she needed to feel that it was real. Sophie looked at the notebooks, then at Vivian. Then she quietly got up, went to the kitchen, and came back with 3 mugs of tea, the good kind from the canister Marcus kept on the back shelf, the one he only used for things that mattered. She set one in front of Vivian without a word. Vivian looked at it, then at Sophie, and something crossed her face that she didn't try to manage or contain, a kind of helpless gratitude that had nothing to do with corporate relationships or power dynamics, and everything to do with a 9-year-old who knew what a person needed before they could ask for it. Thank you, Vivian said. Sophie sat back down with her own mug. The top one first, she said. That's the last thing he finished. You should read the end before you read the middle. It helps. Vivian opened the top notebook. Marcus moved his chair to see. And for the next 2 hours at a kitchen table in a maintenance worker's cottage on the edge of an estate that Richard Ashford had built, from a frequency model and a vision, 3 people read a dead man's last great idea. It was extraordinary. Marcus had worked with brilliant engineers for 8 years at Meridian. He had a precise, calibrated understanding of what brilliance looked like in a technical document, the density of it, the leaps it made, the places where it sacrificed explanation for intuition, because the person writing it was moving faster than full justification allowed. Richard Ashford had been in a different category, and the correction architecture was elegant in the specific way that only the best solutions are not complex, not overwrought, but simple, in a way that required a profound understanding of complexity to arrive at. He'd addressed the fundamental frequency conflict not by eliminating it, but by converting it, turning the resonance that would eventually destroy the network into a stabilizing force, using the conflict as a feature rather than fighting it as a bug. It was, Marcus thought, one of the most beautiful pieces of engineering he had ever read. He said this out loud. Vivian looked at him from across the table. It was past midnight. Sophie had fallen asleep in her chair 40 minutes ago, with her head on her notebook, and neither adult had moved to wake her or suggest she go to bed, because some moments require witnesses, even when the witnesses are sleeping. Say that again, Vivian said. Your father's solution, Marcus said. It's not just a fix. It's a fundamental reconception of how the network manages resonance at scale. If this is implemented correctly, the Lux system doesn't just survive the expansion to 23 satellites, it becomes more stable as it grows. The resonance that would have destroyed it at scale becomes the mechanism that holds it together. He set down his pencil. He'd been making notes in his own notebook translation work, the kind you do when you're reading in a technical language that most people can't access, and you need to build a bridge. He designed a system that gets stronger the bigger it gets. He stopped. I don't know if I've ever seen that done before, in any architecture, in any field. Vivian looked down at the notebook. He never told me, she said. Not accusatory, not grieving exactly something past grief, something that's on the other side of grief when you've been carrying it long enough. I was right here, running his company trying to protect what he'd built, and he was in that study building something 10 times more significant, and he was going to tell you, Marcus said. You don't know that. Yes, I do. Marcus turned pages in the fourth notebook, found the section he'd marked 20 minutes ago, turned the book around to face her. Read the last 3 pages. She read. He watched her face as she read. Watched the moment she found it, whatever was on those last pages, whatever Richard Ashford had written in the final weeks of his working life. He watched her expression move through something complicated and arrive somewhere quiet. She closed the notebook. He was going to present it at a conference, she said. The spring conference. He'd submitted an abstract. She looked up. He died in February. The conference was in April. A long pause. He was going to tell the whole industry. And then he was going to come home and tell me. Marcus didn't say anything. Sometimes the most useful thing a person can do is maintain a steady silence. The necklace, Vivian said. The one Sophie had heard crying that first night. Her hand moved to it automatically. He gave it to me the morning I left for Singapore. He said he had something to show me when I came back. He seemed excited. Happy in the way he got when he'd solved something. Her jaw tightened. I was in such a hurry. I thought it was sentimentality. It was the solution, Marcus said. He'd finished it. He wanted to tell you. Vivian Ashford sat at Marcus Bennett's kitchen table at 12:40 in the morning with her dead father's notebooks spread out around her and her tea gone cold, and the sleeping daughter of a man she'd once thrown money at as a punchline. And she was completely, visibly undone. Not hysterical, not dramatic, but quietly and entirely taken apart by the weight of what she'd found and what she'd missed and the difference between the two. Marcus reached across the table and picked up her cold tea mug and went to the kitchen and poured it out and made her a fresh one and brought it back. She looked at it. How do you do that? She said. Make tea, not fall apart, she said. You lost your wife. You gave up your career. You've been... She gestured not quite at him at the cottage at the life he'd built in the space of a grief. And you're still functional. You're still kind. A pause. I'm the one sitting here with everything, and I feel like I don't know how to be a person. You're doing it right now, he said. Falling apart. Feeling it, he said. That's different from falling apart. Falling apart is when you stop. He nodded at her, at the notebooks, at the full honest weight of the moment. This is just being human. She looked at him across the table for a long time. I owe you an apology, she said. A real one. Not the phone call at midnight, not the job offer. A real one for what I did at the gala, for the money. She stopped. You were standing there with your daughter and I treated you like a prop in my performance and Vivian. I need to say it. You already said it, he said. In the garage. When you walked through the dark to find someone to be honest with. That was the apology. He picked up his pencil again. The rest is just words. She was quiet for a moment. You're infuriating, she said. I've been told. Do you ever need anything? He thought about it. Honestly, a working irrigation system, he said. And for Sophie's school to not schedule events on Thursdays, because that's when they always conflict with everything. He looked up from his notebook. And for the person who designed the Lux phase array calibration system to have read your father's notes first. But that ship has sailed. Vivian almost laughed. It came out close enough to count. We need to tell the board, she said. Not yet. Marcus, not until we've run the implementation model on your father's correction architecture, he said. We need to know it works before we put it in front of people who will decide what it means before they understand what it is. He set his pencil down. I need 3 days. Me, your lead engineer, the notebooks, and a closed working session that Gerald Harmon doesn't know about. Vivian frowned. Harmon is on the board. He has oversight. He had someone follow you to a parking lot to make a competing offer to your new director before he'd worked his first day. Marcus looked at her evenly. He already knows the secondary resonance problem exists. If he finds out your father had the solution, and we haven't fully vetted it yet, he will move to take control of the project before you can establish ownership. 3 days. Then you present it to the full board simultaneously, so nobody has advance time to position. The frown stayed for another 3 seconds. Then Vivian nodded. 3 days, she said. Good. He stood up, moved around the table, and carefully lifted Sophie without waking her 9 years old, and still light enough that he could carry her, still young enough that she let him. Sophie's head found his shoulder with the automatic trust of long practice. Her notebook slid off her lap, and Marcus caught it one-handed before it hit the floor. He nodded toward the corridor. Vivian gathered the notebooks, followed him to Sophie's room, stood in the doorway while Marcus laid his daughter down and pulled the blanket up and did the 1,000 times repeated geography of being a parent, the tuck, the check, the listening for the breath settling. Then he came back to the hallway. Vivian was looking at the photograph on the hall wall, the one Marcus had put up 2 years ago, a family photo from Sophie's 5th birthday. Elaine in the photo 2 years before she got sick, laughing at something. The particular quality of a woman's laugh when she is completely unguarded, when she has forgotten to perform happiness because she is simply inside it. She was beautiful, Vivian said quietly. Yeah, Marcus said. She was. Sophie has her laugh. I know. He looked at the photo. Took me 2 years to be able to look at that picture without it flattening me. Now I put it in the hallway so I see it every day. He paused. Because I'd rather carry it than avoid it. Vivian looked at him. I should go, she said. Yeah. She moved toward the front door, stopped with her hand on the knob. Marcus, if this works, if the implementation works and the board approves the project, and we can actually build what my father designed, this changes everything for Ashford Technologies. The Lux system becomes something nobody in the industry has ever seen. I know. The credit will be his, she said. My father's. I'll make sure of that. The announcement, the industry presentation, the conference paper, his name on everything. That's not strategy. That's just right. Marcus nodded. It is, he said. But I want you there, she said. Not in the background, not as the technical person who runs the numbers. There, beside me, when we present it. She met his eyes. Because none of this happens without you reading a frequency model and deciding it mattered. And I don't want to be the kind of person who lets that disappear because it's complicated. He looked at her for a long moment. We'll see, he said. Not deflecting. Just honest, the genuine uncertainty of a man who is still getting used to the idea that his life has started moving again. Vivian Ashford opened the door, paused on the threshold. The joke, she said, and the careful quality of her voice told him she'd been deciding whether to say this for the last hour. At the gala, about marrying you. She didn't look away. I've been thinking about it. The night air was cool. Somewhere on the grounds, a light was still on. Vivian. I'm not saying anything, she said quickly. I'm just... A pause. I'm aware that I said it as a cruelty and then discovered you were someone worth saying it seriously to. And that's a strange position to be in. She stepped outside. I'm just aware of it, that's all. She walked into the dark. Marcus stood in the open doorway and watched the light in the main house across the grounds, and felt the very specific vertigo of a life rearranging itself, not violently, not suddenly, but with the slow, unstoppable momentum of something that has decided it is going to happen and is simply giving the people involved time to catch up. He closed the door, went back to the kitchen table, sat down with Richard Ashford's notebooks and his own pencil, and the cold quiet of after midnight, and the particular quality of a house where a child is sleeping peacefully, and the work is real, and the people are honest. He opened to a fresh page and started building the implementation model for the dead man's greatest idea. The 3 days were the most concentrated work Marcus had done since Dallas. He brought in Vivian's lead engineer, a man named Paul Reyes, 44, who had the quality of someone who had been underestimated for long enough that he'd learned to perform modest and think enormous. Paul arrived Monday morning at the estate's secondary conference room, looked at the notebooks Marcus had laid out on the table, looked at Marcus and said, "Is this real?" "Read page 12 of the third notebook," Marcus said. Paul read it, looked up. "How has nobody seen this? Nobody opened the notebooks?" Paul looked back down at page 12. "I've been at this company for 4 years," he said. "I did a full technical audit when I started. These notebooks were listed in the archive inventory as," he stopped, "personal papers, not technical documents. They were categorized as personal papers. Because the person who inventoried them wasn't an engineer," Marcus said. Paul sat down with the expression of a man doing a specific kind of grief, the professional grief of someone who has spent 4 years working around a problem that had a solution sitting in a box 12 feet from his office. "Okay," he said after a moment. "Where do we start?" "Page 1, Marcus said. "We read everything. Then we build the implementation model from scratch. We don't assume anything from the existing Lux documentation." He paused. "We read what he actually wrote, not what we think he probably meant." Paul nodded. "And Harmon doesn't know this meeting is happening." Paul looked at him. "He's going to be furious when he finds out." "Yeah," Marcus said. "He is." Paul opened the first notebook. They worked for 11 hours the first day, 9 the second, 7 the third, because by then the model was largely complete, and the last 7 hours were verification, running the implementation against every failure scenario they could construct, stress testing the correction architecture against variables. Richard Ashford's notes hadn't explicitly addressed finding every edge case and either solving it or documenting it transparently. Sophie came to the conference room both afternoons after school and sat in the corner with her notebook. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She had an instinct for when adults were in the middle of something that required quiet. But twice she looked up from whatever she was drawing and said something that redirected the working session in a way that neither Marcus nor Paul had anticipated. The first time, "The thing you're arguing about which frequency to anchor the correction at, you're both right. You're just describing 2 different moments in the same process." Marcus and Paul both stopped, looked at each other, looked back at the model. She was right. The second time, "That number's wrong," pointing at a figure on Paul's whiteboard calculation without looking up from her drawing. "The one in the middle. It should be smaller." Then Paul checked it, recalculated, looked up with an expression that was not quite appalled and not quite reverent. "She's 9, he said to Marcus. 9.5, Sophie said, turning a page in her notebook. By Wednesday night, the implementation model was complete, verified and documented in a format that any competent satellite systems engineer could follow. The correction architecture worked. Not theoretically, the model ran clean against every scenario they'd tested. Richard Ashford's secondary calibration system, built in the solitude of a study that his daughter had thought contained a retired man resting, was fully functional, fully implementable, and would do exactly what he'd designed it to do. The Lux network at 23 satellites would be the most stable commercial GPS-adjacent system on the planet. Marcus sat back in his chair at 10 p.m. Wednesday and looked at the complete model on the screen and felt the particular stillness of a problem that has been solved, not the ego of it, not the achievement, but the clean, specific quiet of a system that is finally working the way it was always meant to. Paul had gone home an hour ago. Sophie was asleep on the conference room couch under Marcus's jacket. The building was silent. His phone buzzed. Vivian board meeting is Friday. 9 a.m. Harmon requested an emergency session. He found out about the notebooks. Marcus read it twice. Typed back, "How?" 30 seconds. Claire. He pressured her. "I found out an hour ago. I'm handling it, but he's already calling for an independent technical review. He wants to have the correction architecture assessed by an outside firm before we present it internally. He's trying to buy time to get his people in front of it." Marcus looked at the completed model on the screen. 3 days of work. Richard Ashford's 47 pages. Paul's 4 years of Lux system knowledge. Sophie's 2 corrections that had each saved approximately 6 hours of wrong direction work. Typed, "Is the board meeting still Friday?" "Yes." "Then we're ready." A pause. "Marcus Harmon is going to come after you directly. He's going to question your credentials, your role, the validity of any work that comes from a maintenance supervisor who's been out of the field for 9 years. He's going to make this about you instead of about the work. I need you to be prepared for that." Marcus looked at his sleeping daughter. Her dark hair. The notebook she'd fallen asleep on opened to a page full of satellite diagrams and the corrections she'd made to Paul's frequency model. "Let him," Marcus typed back. "That's not a strategy." Meh. "Yes, it is," he typed. "Let him make it about me, because the work is the work. And when the board looks at the implementation model, the work will be self-evident. A maintenance supervisor did it. A 9-year-old made 2 corrections that neither I nor your lead engineer caught. If Harmon wants to explain why that doesn't count, let him explain it. In front of everyone." A longer pause this time. "You're going to walk into that boardroom Friday morning." Not a question. "Yes. And you're not scared." He looked at the implementation model. At Richard Ashford's solution finally complete, finally ready, finally able to do what it had been designed to do. At Sophie, asleep on a couch, with a notebook full of satellite diagrams. "I've been scared," he typed. In Dallas. At a hospital in Boston at 4 a.m. At a graveside in March. He paused. Then, a boardroom full of rich people who've decided to underestimate me is not the same category of scary. A very long pause. No, Vivian wrote back. "I suppose it isn't." Then, after another moment, "Get some sleep. You and Sophie both." He looked at his daughter. "Yeah," he typed. He closed the laptop, gathered Sophie from the couch without waking her. She resettled against his shoulder with the automatic ease of a child who has always trusted the person carrying her. He turned off the lights. Friday was coming. Gerald Harmon was coming. And Richard Ashford's greatest work was sitting finished and verified on a laptop in a conference room on the estate that the man had built, waiting for the world to finally understand what he'd spent his last years trying to say. Marcus carried his daughter through the dark to the cottage and put her to bed, and did not feel afraid. He felt for the first time since Dallas completely ready. Friday arrived the way consequential days always arrive, without ceremony, without warning in the weather, without any external signal that the world was about to rearrange itself. Marcus's alarm went off at 5:15 a.m., and he lay still for exactly 30 seconds, staring at the ceiling, and then he got up and made oatmeal. 1 with honey, 1 plain. Sophie came to the kitchen at 5:40, which was unusual. She rarely woke before 6:30 on school days. She was already dressed. Not in her school clothes. In the dark blue dress she wore to things that mattered, the one Elaine's mother had sent from Portland 2 Christmases ago, that Sophie had declared immediately to be her serious dress. Marcus looked at her. "You're not going to school today?" Sophie said. "No," he agreed. "I want to come." He set her oatmeal in front of her. "Sophie, I corrected 2 calculations in the implementation model," she said with the precise calm of someone presenting evidence. "Paul said so. Those corrections are in the document the board is going to see today. I'm part of the work." She picked up her spoon. "I should be part of the presenting." He looked at his 9-year-old daughter in her serious dress. "The meeting starts at 9, he said. "I know." She ate her oatmeal. "I'll be quiet unless someone is wrong about something." He almost argued. He knew the counter-arguments boardrooms were not places for children. Harmon would use her presence as ammunition. It was professional enough of a minefield, without adding a variable nobody could predict. Then he thought about what she'd done in that conference room over 3 days. What she'd seen that he and Paul had missed. The 2 moments where a 9-year-old's unfiltered attention had redirected the entire model. "You'll sit next to me," he said. "Obviously," Sophie said, and finished her oatmeal. They arrived at the main house at 8:40. Vivian was already in the corridor outside the boardroom, standing with Paul Reyes and Claire, running through something on a tablet with the focused energy of a person who has decided exactly how the next hour is going to go. She looked up when Marcus and Sophie came through the door, and her expression did something brief and complicated relief, he thought, and something else underneath it that she didn't try to hide. Then she looked at Sophie in the serious dress. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," Sophie said. "Is he already in there?" Vivian glanced at Marcus. "Harmon arrived at 8:15, she said. "He brought 2 people I don't recognize. I'm assuming technical consultants he's had reviewing whatever information he's managed to pull together on the Ashford architecture. He's been in the boardroom for 25 minutes. She paused. "He knows you're coming. I told him last night." "What did he say?" Marcus asked. "He said, and I quote, that he looked forward to hearing from the maintenance staff." Her voice was absolutely flat when she said it. Marcus nodded once. "Good." Paul looked at him sideways. "That's good." "It means he's planning to perform," Marcus said. "People who perform make predictable moves." He looked at Vivian. "You have the implementation model loaded. On every screen in the room." "Your father's notebooks." She held up the dark blue cloth-bound volume, the last one, the one with the completed correction architecture. "Right here." "Then we're ready." He looked at Sophie. "Remember the rules." "Quiet unless someone is wrong," Sophie said. "And if someone is wrong—" "Tell you first," she said. "Not them." "Good." He looked at Vivian. "Let's go." Mets. The boardroom held 12 people when they walked in, and the quality of attention Marcus walked into was something he felt physically the specific charge of a room where 2 competing narratives are already in contest, and everyone present knows it. The Ashford board was 8 people, 2 of whom Marcus recognized from their photographs in the company's public filings. The 2 people Harmon had brought were standing near the far wall. Both men, both with the particular bearing of hired expertise, the kind that came preloaded with a conclusion, and was simply waiting for the right moment to deliver it. Gerald Harmon sat at the far end of the table. He looked. Marcus thought like a man who had been certain about something for long enough that the certainty had become his personality. He looked at Marcus when they entered, then at Sophie, then back at Marcus. Something moved across his face that was not quite contempt and not quite amusement, but lived in the territory between them. "Mr. Bennett," he said. "Good of you to join us." A deliberate pause. "I see you've brought your daughter." "I have," Marcus said, and took his seat beside Vivian without elaborating. Sophie sat beside him, set her notebook on the table, and looked at Harmon with the same direct measuring regard she gave everyone the look of a child who hasn't yet learned that certain people's authority is supposed to precede their assessment of it. Harmon looked away first. Vivian opened the meeting. She was extraordinary at it. Marcus had seen her in formal settings before, but this was different. This was Vivian Ashford, with something personal at stake, presenting to people who held real power over her future, and she moved through the opening with the controlled precision of someone who has decided that the truth is her strongest argument and has organized it accordingly. She presented the secondary resonance problem first, clean, clear, unsparing about the fact that it had gone undetected for weeks. She presented Frank DeLuca's independent identification of the issue as external validation. She presented the timeline of cascade failure, what would happen to the Lux network at 23 satellites without intervention, and when. The board listened. Some of them had known about the resonance problem. Some were hearing the full scope of it for the first time, and Marcus watched their faces move through the specific sequence of controlled alarm that people in positions of responsibility perform when something serious is being disclosed in a formal setting. Then Harmon spoke. "Before we go further," he said, smooth and measured the voice of a man who has learned to perform reasonableness while executing strategy, "I'd like to raise a concern the board should have on the table. The solution being presented today was developed outside the company's engineering infrastructure, without board knowledge or approval by an individual who," he looked at Marcus, "with respect, whose current professional role is maintenance supervisor on this estate. I think we owe it to our shareholders to ask whether a solution developed under those circumstances has been subjected to appropriate independent review." A murmur around the table. Not hostile, just the sound of people taking the point seriously, which was exactly what Harmon had designed it to produce. "Gerald." Vivian's voice was even. "The solution was developed by Marcus Bennett, who holds degrees from MIT in aerospace engineering and electromagnetic systems, and who served as senior systems architect on the Meridian 7 program, which remains the most sophisticated low-orbit communications network in American military history. His professional history is in the board package you received yesterday." A beat. "Along with the independent verification from Frank DeLuca, who holds a position I imagine your consultants are familiar with." One of Harmon's consultants shifted slightly. The other one looked at the table. Harmon smiled. "I don't question Mr. Bennett's historical credentials. I question the validity of work done in a 9-day window by someone who has been outside the field for—" "I'd like to show the board something," Marcus said. The room went quiet. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't leaned forward or changed his posture. He'd simply spoken the way he spoke when he had something to say that required no performance to land. He looked at Vivian. She nodded. He stood up and walked to the display screen. "The implementation model is on your screens," he said. "Page 1. If you'll look at the frequency cascade projection in the upper left quadrant. This is what happens to the Lux network at 23 satellites without intervention. The timeline is 11 days from today, based on current deployment schedule." He let them look at it for 10 seconds, enough to register, not enough to start discussing it. Page 2 is Richard Ashford's correction architecture. This is what he designed. I didn't design this. Paul Reyes didn't design this. Richard Ashford designed this in his study over the last 2 years of his life, and it has been sitting in a box on this estate since his funeral. The room was very still. The correction architecture converts the resonance that would destroy the network into a stabilizing force. At 23 satellites, the Lux system doesn't just survive, it becomes structurally superior to any commercial GPS-adjacent network currently in operation. He looked at Harmon's consultants. Page 4 is the full implementation model, which I'm happy to walk through in technical detail. Page 7 is the stress test results across 43 failure scenarios. Page 9 is the independent verification signed by Frank DeLuca, who was chief engineer at Meridian Defense for 16 years and who identified the secondary resonance problem independently before he knew about these notebooks. He stepped back from the screen. "I have been out of the field for 9 years. The engineering in this document was done by a dead man who loved this company and spent his last years finishing something he knew mattered. My job was to read what he wrote and understand it. That's all." Silence. Then one of the board members, a woman in her 60s named Dr. Patricia Wynn, who sat at Vivian's right and who had said nothing since the meeting began, leaned forward and said quietly, "Mr. Bennett, turn to page 4. Walk us through the implementation." Harmon opened his mouth. "Gerald," Dr. Wynne said without looking at him, "let the man talk." Marcus talked for 40 minutes. Not a presentation, a conversation. Questions from the board, some technical and some not, and he answered every one of them directly, without hedging, without the defensive circling of someone trying to protect a position. When he didn't know something, he said so. When the question was about Richard Ashford's original intent, he read from the notebook. Twice Harmon's consultants attempted to introduce objections both times. Marcus addressed the technical substance of the objection within 60 seconds, and the consultant had nothing to follow up with. The third time, one of them tried, Paul Reyes, spoke up from the far end of the table, with the specific focused energy of a man who has spent 4 years working around a problem that had a solution in a box down the hall and has some feelings about that. "I'd like to ask your consultant a question," Paul said in the direction of Harmon's expert. "What is the resonant frequency signature at scale for a 17-unit phased array with 0.003 oscillation tolerance deviation on the primary anchor unit?" A pause. "That's," the consultant started. "It's a specific number," Paul said, "because I calculated it twice this week, and Marcus calculated it independently, and we arrived at the same figure. If your review of the architecture was thorough, you should have that number." The consultant looked at the table. Paul looked at Harmon. "They haven't done a technical review," Paul said. "They've done a credibility review. Those are different things." The room shifted. Marcus felt it, the specific atmospheric change of a room where the power balance has just moved quietly like a tide. Harmon said, "I want to go on the record that this board should require an independent technical opinion." "Gerald." Dr. Wynne again, still quiet, still not looking at him. "We have the Meridian 7 architect and the chief engineer on this implementation, presenting a verified solution to a critical infrastructure problem with an 11-day window. What exactly do you propose we wait for?" Harmon looked around the table. Nobody looked back at him in the way he needed. The vote was 7-1. May. Approve the implementation of Richard Ashford's correction architecture. Authorize the full engineering deployment. Recognize Marcus Bennett as Director of Systems Architecture, effective immediately, with full board backing. Harmon voted no. He sat through the announcement of the result with the composed expression of a man who has lost this particular battle and is already calculating the next one. Then he stood up, buttoned his jacket, looked at Marcus across the table. "You're good at this," he said. Not admiringly, not hostilely, just the honest assessment of one strategist acknowledging another. "I underestimated what you were." "Most people did," Marcus said. "I won't again." "That's your business," Marcus said. Harmon picked up his folder. Nodded at Vivian, not warmly, but correctly. Looked at Sophie, who was watching him from her chair beside Marcus with the patient attention of a child who has been following a complicated situation and has arrived at her own conclusions about it. "You're very observant," Harmon told her. "I know," Sophie said. "But," he almost smiled. Then he walked out, his two consultants behind him, and the door closed, and the room let out a collective breath that nobody had been consciously holding. Dr. Wynne reached across the table and shook Marcus's hand. "Your father's notebooks are extraordinary," she said to Vivian. "I'd like to recommend the company fund a formal publication of his work. The engineering community should have access to this methodology." Vivian looked at her. "Yes," she said, and her voice was steady, but something underneath it wasn't. "Yes, I think he'd have wanted that." The hallway afterward was quiet. The board members dispersed with the efficiency of people who had other meetings, other buildings, other cities. Paul shook Marcus's hand with both of his and said, 9.5 years old, and looked at Sophie with an expression that was part awe and part defeat, and walked away shaking his head. Claire appeared from nowhere, handed Vivian a tablet with 17 urgent messages on it, and disappeared again with the seamless efficiency that Marcus had come to understand was her superpower. And then it was just the three of them. Marcus, Vivian, Sophie, standing in the corridor, outside a room where something had just ended, and something else had just irrevocably begun. Sophie looked up at Vivian. "Your dad was really smart," she said. Vivian's composure, which had held through every moment of the last 90 minutes, did the thing it had done in the garage the night she'd walked through the dark. Just for a second. Just a fracture quickly rebuilt, but real. "Yes," she said. "He was." "You're like him," Sophie said. "When you talk about the satellites, you sound like his notebooks." Vivian looked at her. "His notebooks don't sound like anything," she said carefully. "They're written." "I know," Sophie said. "But they have a voice. Everything does." She looked at Vivian with complete seriousness. "His voice sounds like yours, when you stop performing and just talk." A silence. Marcus watched Vivian absorb this the way he'd watched her absorb everything Sophie said, with the particular stillness of someone who has not yet built a defense against a 9-year-old telling the truth. "Thank you," Vivian said. She said it the way people say things they mean completely. Sophie nodded, picked up her notebook. "Can I wait outside? I want to draw the front garden." "Yeah, Bug," Marcus said. "Stay where I can see you from the window." She walked toward the exit with her notebook under her arm, and her sleeping fox sneakers quiet on the floor, and her serious dress, and the specific self-possession of a child who has fully participated in something important and knows it. They stood in the corridor for a moment, just the two of them for the first time, without the buffer of crisis or work, or the immediate weight of something that needed solving. "It's done," Vivian said, not triumphant, just settled. The sound of someone standing on solid ground after a long time on uncertain footing. "The implementation will take 6 weeks, Marcus said. "Paul will need to coordinate with the satellite operations team. The recalibration needs to be sequenced correctly or—" "Marcus. The Unit 6 anchor adjustment has to be—" "Marcus." Her voice stopped him. "It's done. The work part, the boardroom part." She looked at him. "Can you stop being an engineer for 30 seconds? He looked at her. "I don't know," he said honestly. "It's been 9 years, and I still haven't managed it." She laughed, a real one, the kind that surprised her. He heard it land in the corridor, and it occurred to him that her laugh, when it was unguarded, had a quality that he liked specifically. Not performance, not social calculation, just a sound that a person makes when something has genuinely gotten through. "Thank you," she said. And then before he could redirect it to the work or the notebooks or the board outcome, not for the satellites, for all of it. "For not walking away when I gave you every reason to." She held his eyes. "I threw money at your feet." "You did?" "In front of 200 people." "Yep." "And then you fixed the car and went home and made oatmeal." "Someone had to." She shook her head slowly. "You are the most—" She stopped. "I don't have a word for what you are." "Maintenance supervisor," he said. "Director of systems architecture, as of about 40 minutes ago." "That's not what I meant." "I know," he said. They looked at each other. And then Vivian Ashford did something that cost her something. He could see the cost of it, the deliberate step off the edge of the controlled and into the honest. She reached into the pocket of her jacket and produced the dark blue notebook. Richard Ashford's last one, the one she'd been carrying all morning. "I want you to keep this," she said. He looked at it. "Vivian, that's your—" "It's the completed work," she said. "The whole architecture. It belongs with the person who understood it." She held it out. "My father spent his last years finishing something he didn't get to give to anyone. I think—" Her voice was steady, but the steadiness was something she was actively maintaining, and they both knew it. "I think he'd want it with someone who reads the whole thing before deciding what it means." Marcus took the notebook. He held it the way she'd been holding it all morning, with the awareness that some objects carry more than their physical weight. "I'll take care of it," he said. "I know you will." She took a breath. There's something else. He waited. The joke, she said. That I made at the gala. She looked at him with the directness that was her most honest quality. No performance, no management, just the full weight of a woman saying exactly what she means. I've thought about it every day since. Not the cruelty of it, the other part. A pause. The dare. Vivian, I'm not asking for anything, she said quickly. I know where we are. I know what you've been through. I know that trust is not something I've earned in full, and I'm not... She stopped, gathered herself. I just want you to know that when I said it at the gala, I was performing. And when I thought about it afterward, in the garage, in the boardroom, in the parking lot at Sophie's school, I wasn't performing anymore. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were clear. I wanted you to know the difference. Marcus stood in the corridor with a dead man's notebook in his hands, and the full weight of 5 parts of a story that had started with money scattered on cobblestones and arrived here at honesty, at consequence, at 2 broken lives that had found each other in the specific way that broken things sometimes do not, by being fixed, but by being present. He thought about Elaine, not with the old guilt, not with Dallas, and 4:14 a.m., and the satellite he'd fixed from a hotel room while she died. He thought about her the way he'd learned to think about her in the years since, with the recognition that grief is not a door you walk through once, but a house you learn to live in, and that living in it fully is different from being trapped in it, and that the people you've loved would not most of them want you trapped. He thought about Sophie in her serious dress already outside, drawing the garden, moving through the world with the total confidence of a child who has never once doubted that she is loved. He thought about what Frank DeLuca had said on the phone, what Paul had said in the conference room, what a 9-year-old had said in a garage about a woman who was tired but didn't know it yet. He looked at Vivian. I know the difference, he said, between the gala version and the other version. She held his gaze. And I'm a man who picks Sophie up at 3, he said. Every day. Non-negotiable. He held her eyes. But there are 22 other hours in a day, and I've been alone for 7 of the 7 years I've had them. Something in her face changed. Not dramatically, just the specific quiet change of a person who has been holding their breath, discovering that they can breathe. I'm aware, she said, that I am not easy. No, he agreed. I'm told I'm a significant amount of work. You are, he said. So is a 1961 Jaguar E-Type with an active diagnostic transmitter hidden behind the driver's seat. He paused. I fixed that too. She almost smiled. Was that a metaphor? I don't do metaphors, he said. I'm an engineer. She did smile then. The unguarded one, the one Sophie had said sounded like her father's notebooks. Dinner, she said. This weekend, the 3 of us. She glanced toward the window where Sophie was visible outside, seated cross-legged on the low stone wall, notebook on her knees drawing. She gets to pick the restaurant. She'll pick soup, Marcus said. Then we'll have soup. She'll also talk the entire time. Good, Vivian said. I want to hear everything she says. Marcus looked out the window at his daughter. Sophie, without looking up from her drawing, raised one hand in the specific wave of a child who knows she's being watched and approves of the situation. 6 weeks later, the Lux Correction architecture went live. Not with a press release, not with a formal announcement. At 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, when satellite operations ran best in the quiet of low atmospheric interference. Paul Reyes and his team pushed the recalibration sequence to Unit 6, and the correction architecture that Richard Ashford had designed in the solitude of his study propagated through the network in exactly the pattern his notebooks had predicted. 17 satellites held. Wall. And when Phase 3 launched 4 months later, when the 23rd satellite took its position and the full network came to scale, for the first time, something remarkable happened that even Marcus hadn't been certain of until he saw the data. The resonance that had been building toward catastrophe, the frequency conflict built into the architecture at the molecular level of its design, converted precisely as Richard Ashford had calculated it would. Not eliminated. Converted. The force that would have destroyed the system became the mechanism that held it together. The Lux network at full scale was the most stable commercial GPS-adjacent system on the planet. Exactly as the dead man had designed. The industry conference was in April. Vivian presented. Marcus sat beside her on the stage, which was his condition for being there, not standing at a podium, not performing, just sitting where he could think and speak plainly when he had something plain to say. Sophie was in the front row with her notebook, in the serious dress, in the sleeping fox sneakers she'd finally agreed to replace, with an identical pair when the original pair wore through completely. Vivian stood at this podium in front of 400 engineers, investors, and industry leaders and said Richard Ashford's name 31 times. Marcus counted without meaning to. Every technical achievement, every architectural innovation, every elegant solution, she gave it back to him. Fully. Completely. With the specific generosity of a daughter who has found her father's last gift and refuses to let it be mistaken for hers. At the end, she said something that wasn't in the prepared remarks. Marcus knew because he'd read the prepared remarks, and what she said next was not in them. "The greatest lesson this work taught me," she said, and her voice had the quality it always had when she stopped performing and simply talked, "is not technical. It's this: the most important things are often invisible to the people with the most power to act on them." My father's notebooks sat in a box for 6 years. The man who read them had been maintaining our irrigation systems. She paused, paying attention to the right things, and having the humility to recognize when someone else is paying better attention than you is not a soft skill. It is the most sophisticated form of intelligence I have ever encountered. Another pause. I learned that from a maintenance worker who wouldn't pick up my money off the ground, and from his 9-year-old daughter who corrects frequency calculations in her spare time. 400 people turned to find Sophie in the front row. Sophie looked up from her notebook, assessed the situation, and gave a small, precise wave. The room laughed, the good kind, the kind that has warmth in it. Marcus looked at Vivian at the podium. She looked back at him. And then, because she was Vivian Ashford, and she had never once in her life done the expected thing when the honest thing was available, she said, with the full 400 people between them and the microphone still live, and her father's necklace at her throat. "I told a single father once that I'd marry him if he dared. I wasn't joking then either. I was just afraid." A beat. "I'm less afraid now." The room went completely still. Marcus sat in his chair on the stage of an industry conference with Richard Ashford's last notebook in his jacket pocket and the full weight of 5 months of a story that had started with money on cobblestones, and he felt something he hadn't felt in 7 years. Not the desperate, grasping hope of someone trying to outrun grief, but the quiet, steady, bone-deep certainty of a man who has arrived somewhere real. He did not say anything in front of 400 people. He did not have to. Sophie looked up from her notebook at her father, then at Vivian at the podium, then back at her father. "Say yes," she said in the specific, carrying voice of a 9-year-old who does not fully grasp the concept of an indoor voice. Laughter from every direction, warm and full and real. Marcus looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Marcus. And something passed between them that had no name in engineering or in grief or in the language of power and strategy and satellite communications, something that lived only in the specific frequency between two people who have seen each other clearly and chosen each other anyway. "Yes," he said. That evening after the conference, after the handshakes and the industry conversations and the quiet professional acknowledgement of people who understood what Richard Ashford's work actually meant, the three of them found a small restaurant 3 blocks from the conference center. Sophie picked it. It served soup. They sat at a corner table, and Sophie talked the entire time the way Marcus had predicted about the conference and the satellites, and the man in the 3rd row, who had asked a question that was technically wrong, but interestingly wrong, and Vivian listened to every word with the full attention of someone who has discovered late and gratefully what it feels like to be inside a family. Marcus watched them. His daughter who heard the things others couldn't hear. The woman who had thrown money at his feet and then walked through the dark to find honesty. The table between them with soup going warm and a notebook open to a page of satellite diagrams and a dark blue cloth-bound notebook tucked beside Marcus's jacket on the empty chair. He thought about Richard Ashford alone in his study, finishing something he loved for someone he loved running out of time before he could close the distance between the two. He thought about Elaine in a hospital room in Boston, telling him to go, because she knew him well enough to know he would carry the satellites and the failure and the missed goodbye for the rest of his life, and she wanted him to carry them as lightly as possible. He thought about a 9-year-old girl who heard machines crying, and necklaces missing their owners, and frequency conflicts in satellite arrays, who had never once stopped trusting that her father would be there when she needed him, and who had decided with the total confidence of a child who has been loved completely that the woman across the table was worth keeping. Yay. Some people spend their whole lives chasing the version of themselves they think will finally deserve happiness. Marcus Bennett had spent 7 years building a life around someone else's happiness, and had somehow, in the building of it, become a man that happiness could find. He picked up his spoon. "Soup's good," he said. Sophie looked at him with Elaine's eyes and Elaine's smile. "It's always good when I pick," she said. Vivian reached across the table and took Marcus's free hand. Not dramatically, not as a performance. Just the simple, irrevocable gesture of a woman who has made a decision and is done being afraid of it. He didn't pull back. Outside, the April night was clear, and somewhere above it, invisible and orbiting at 23 points across the sky, the satellites held their positions and their coherence and their hard-won stability, each one a piece of a dead man's greatest idea, finally doing exactly what it was always designed to do. Holding everything together. Getting stronger the bigger it got. Just as Richard Ashford had always known it would.